Stay up to date on the latest political news this election season for less. Visit inforum.news/port and get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Subscribe now at inforum.news/port. Welcome to Plain Talk. And so there's going to be, obviously we're all kind of in campaign mode, campaign season going on, but believe it or not, in just a few months, we're going to have a legislative session. And all of the policy debates and everything that, and intrigues and everything that go along with a legislative session in our state. And there are now, I don't know if competing is the right word. Let's just say that there's two proposals for tax cuts that have been put on the table. One is an income tax cut, basically is a flattening of the income tax, and then an elimination for most North Dakota filers. That has been proposed by a group of lawmakers and Governor Doug Burgum. We had the governor on the show to talk about that. Now another proposal has come out, this one dealing with property taxes, and that comes from a group of lawmakers, including State Representative Mike Nathy, who joins us now, along, of course, with my co-host Chad Oban, who always joins me on Wednesdays. And Mike, first of all, thanks for coming on. And second, give us the broad strokes of this plan. What are you proposing doing?
You bet. Hey, great to hear from you guys. Thanks for having me today. So really, in a nutshell, what we're doing is the state's going to buy down the number of mills having to do with education funding in the state. So when one takes a look at their property tax, the only portion of the tax that the legislative body can really control is education funding on there. And so right now, the schools are assessed, they can go up to 60 mills. We would buy half that down. We'd go from 60 down to 30 mills. That's at a cost of roughly about $340 million. That would then equate, guys, into a 25% property tax reduction statewide on commercial, on residential, on everything. As I've said many times in the past, this is nothing new. We did this very same mechanism back in 2013 when we redid the K-12 formula. I happened to be a first session chairman of education in the House at the time. Got a heck of an education on how all that works. But it was extremely effective. And I remember seeing and I used to have a copy at my office, and I think I threw it away, but a copy of the front page of the Forum after that, 20, 25%, 28% reductions in property taxes just in the Valley. So this works. We're not reinventing the wheel here. This is a tried and true method as far as lowering property tax. Also in the bill, I should also back up, by us buying it down to 30 mills, the state will then now be funding roughly about 85% of the cost of education in the state of North Dakota. As you guys know, we are constitutionally obligated to provide education for all our students in the state in K-12. So we'd be meeting that obligation. And just to give you some context, when I was first elected back in 2008, we were only paying in about that 40% range. The state was only paying about 40% of the cost. Here we are all these years later, and this bill passed, we'd be 85%. The other part of the bill we have in there would be changing the way we talk about funding, basically changing our terminology from mills to dollars, so your average citizen can understand what we're talking about here. Because the mill system can be complicated. In my mind, it's a bit of a shell game. Some of my colleagues don't understand even how this mill system works. So, for transparency, we want to change that conversation from mills to dollars. Anytime they meet publicly, anytime they disseminate any information, they talk in dollars. Their finance people could still use the mill system if they want, but we want this spoken to the public in dollars. Because in my household, we speak in dollars. We don't talk in mills. And the other part of the plan is we would freeze the valuations. And again, that's part of the complicated formula as far as property tax. We would freeze the valuations for a biennium for 2 years. So valuations, meaning if your house goes up right now in value, that increase in valuation is also figured into your property tax bill today. We would be freezing it at that amount for 2 years. So the schools, that would force the schools into baseline budgeting. They would know exactly what they're getting with that dollar amount, especially the second year. Again, they can always increase the taxes. They can go above that baseline, but they would have to talk about it in dollars and explain it to the public why they did it then. So we just think this would be a great mechanism to lower property taxes. As I said, it's been proven. It'd be a big boost to the North Dakota economy and to the business economy, especially what's going out there with the national economy. It helps a lot. It helps people in all sectors. I mean, my business, I deal with a lot of seniors, and there's a lot of seniors who own their homes, and they may not pay much in income tax or any other taxes, but they pay a lot in property taxes. That is, for a lot of seniors, that is their biggest yearly bill, probably outside of health insurance, is property tax. So we think this helps people all across, and we've gotten a lot of great support for this. Got a long way to go. It's only October, but so we're out there talking to people about the bill, and so far the response has been excellent.
Hey, Mike, this is Chad. First of all, thanks for putting out this proposal in a timeline that we can actually have discussions about that, because I think this has caused a lot of conversations. One of the things that I've been hearing, I happened to be on the road last week meeting with legislators from both parties, is some concern about the 2013 model, that there's legislators who remember when the state ended up not being able to fund as much, that then the legislature got blamed by local subdivisions for property taxes going up after the allotment. Are you at all concerned about the state legislature sort of continuing this thing where the legislator gets credit, but then if the state budget's not so great, then you can't pay as much, and then you all get blamed when property taxes go up? Are you concerned at all about that? Is there any mechanisms in place to make sure that this is sustainable if, for example, oil prices go down?
Yeah, I'm not really concerned about that part, Chad. We're going to get property taxes go up. We get blamed anyways, whether it's right or wrong. We'll get to blame no matter what. I agree with you with some of the mechanisms in place. Some of the comments I've heard is, hey, this is great, but what about all the other political subdivisions? You reduce the the property tax, 25% over here, but then counties and cities and parks, they're going to, backfill all that up. And I know some of my colleagues would like to see some legislation to stop that from happening. And I'm not opposed to that at all, but that would be in a separate bill. This bill is strictly focused on education and education funding. So as far as the sustainability, those were a lot of the concern in 2013, Chad. Can we do this? Is this sustainable doing what we're talking about today? And there were a lot of dire predictions that only last one, we didn't have the money to do it more than one biennium. And here we are 10 years later almost, and it was easily sustainable and it was very effective. We at the press conference said, hey, we're looking at the legacy fund, possibly helping to do this. We could look at the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund, maybe using some of that to help fund some of this. There's other mechanisms that we can do. There's combinations thereof. So that'll all be discussed, I think, during the session as we go along.
Mike, I guess maybe piggybacking a little bit on Chad's question, property taxes are a perennial issue, area of debate. It seems like for about as long as I've been writing about politics in North Dakota, people have been upset about the property taxes, and the state's tried a lot of things. The first one in my memory during my career is we tried to do like a income tax or I think credit. I think it was like an income tax credit based on property taxes. We tried doing that. You've mentioned the 2013 reform. The state also did a buy down in the social services area, for the counties, yep, where the state was buying it down. And it seems like every time we try this approach, it seems like we come back and people are still upset about their property taxes, or there's a feeling that the local, and I know you sort of addressed this where, that would be a separate question, but should it be a separate question? Because it seems like every time the state tries to buy down the local property tax, we end up finding a way for the property taxes to stay about where they've always been, and the state's just obligated to spending more locally. That to me doesn't look like a solution to the property tax.
Well, I guess our bill is one solution to the property tax. And, the problem with all this, Robin, and since I've been in there too, I voted for some of these property tax schemes that, okay, we're going to try this when I was a new legislator and didn't really know what I was getting into. But, the problem is we are trying to control something that we don't control. We don't control the cities and counties and parks when it comes to their budgets and their spending. We've tried to do all these sorts of things. We did the social service buy down, which was effective, and that was the one area we could do. But overall, we can't. We just can't control that. And then combine that with property values that have gone up every year since I've been in the in the legislature. I mean, everybody wants their house to be valuable and go up, but then that also is reflected in your property taxes too. So there's a couple of things that the legislature absolutely does not control. Now, we get to blame because I think a lot of people don't fully understand how some of the property taxes work. And like I said, it's very confusing. It can be confusing to people. So, we're just trying to come out with what we can. I do think there will be a bill to maybe patch some of these holes. We in the House have tried to do caps on the on schools, and I mean not on schools, but on cities and counties. We've always gotten it through the House, but could never get it through the Senate. And that was one way we thought maybe we could slow it down. The governor has said this before, and I wholeheartedly agree with him. There does come a time too that if people aren't happy with the way the cities and counties and parks are spending, and schools for that matter, if they're not happy with where their taxes are, they have got to take responsibility for who they're electing to these seats and hold these people accountable. And it's funny, as much complaining as we hear from the public, and we tell the public, hey, these subs, they have meetings about property taxes. Go there and voice your opinion. Former Senate Tax Chair Dwight Cook went to a couple meetings, I remember, and he went there expecting this big crowd of taxpayers that year. They were all upset about the property taxes. He went there for the meeting. He was the only one there, other than the board member, other than the county members. So the public, is unhappy with it, but they have got to get involved. They have got to let these people know they're not happy with their spending.
Mike, one of the concerns I have is the message that the legislators might hear if we're spending. I think the cost of your proposals, is it 380 or 340 million?
340.
340. My concern is the legislature is going to say, look, we're already throwing 340 million into K through 12, so we can't do any additional funding to the funding formula. And with inflation really hammering our school districts right now, I worry about that message. Are you at all concerned about that this is going to affect the ability of legislators to maybe
No.
fund public schools the way they need to on top of the property tax relief?
No, I don't. Again, I think that's two separate conversations. I sit in the appropriations section that handles the K-12 budget. We were just given some numbers at budget section last week. The Common Schools Trust Fund is going to throw off almost $500 million. That is used to help fund the K-12 formula. And no, I don't see that at all. We're also going to be in one heck of a great financial position, probably the best since I've been up there. We're looking, guys, when you listen to what we heard last week, we could be in the neighborhood of $2.5 billion in surplus. And so do I think this is going to hurt the chances of getting some funding for K-12 or funding K-12 correctly? No, I do not. Actually, I think K-12 is sitting in a pretty good position going into this session when it comes to that.
Mike, what about questions? I remember we've been talking a lot about the 2013 session. And so I've been thinking a lot about what happened on the 2012 ballot, where there was a proposal to eliminate property taxes entirely. And I remember that debate because I was actually, and I've changed my position on this since then. But at the time, I was for eliminating the property tax. Now, since then, I've done some more thinking. I'm glad we didn't, because I'm just, as much as I dislike the property tax, I just don't know what we replace it with. I don't want a local income tax. I don't want to see local sales taxes go through the roof. So that's a problematic thing and probably a debate for another show. But the winning argument in 2012, because the measure to abolish, I think it didn't even get 30% of the vote. It went down in flames. And the winning argument, I remember, was that people didn't like local school. They didn't want superintendents and school boards and parent-teacher associations and everything having to go to Bismarck to beg for money. To me, that was the argument that won the day with the voters. But now here we are immediately in the 2013 session. We had the state take over more school funding, and now we are here again with the state wanting to take over more school funding. But yet that argument obviously really resonated with the public back in 2012. So can you talk about that? What about people who are concerned about, having to beg Bismarck for local school funds?
Well, the new fund. Well, after 2012, we had the K-12. We redid the K-12 formula, right? And Chad knows that formula pretty well. And we pay the schools so much per student as they go in there. So the days of them having to come in and beg for money for districts or overall are really gone because the formula takes care of a lot of this stuff already. It's set in there. If there's a debate on funding, it's, hey, can we change this factor from 1.5 to 2.5? Or those are the kind of the discussions we have. Right now we're paying, I think, 10 in the neighborhood, Chad probably knows better than I, 10,600, 10,800 per student in there. And then obviously the debate will be next session. Do we increase that? So, and to see what's going on. So if I remember correctly from 2012, I think a lot of people were afraid of all of a sudden, the legislators are going to be not only a school board member, but a county board member and a city council member, right? We would take care of all those budgets. And people just didn't like that. They didn't like that idea one iota. So I'm not really concerned about that, to be honest with you. Like I said, I think this is the way we can do it. I do get frustrated though. We've been banging our head trying to give meaningful tax relief. As you guys know, last session the state gave $1.5 billion in tax relief. Take a look at your property tax form. You'll see in there where it says legislative tax relief. And if we didn't have the $1.5 billion in there, that's how much more your property taxes would be. And it's quite substantial. And we've been doing that for a fair number of years now. I think the number is we've done $8 billion towards this program. It's been on the property tax statement for a while. So our plan would be over and above that $1.5 billion that we did last session. So, it's kind of funny because we hear more about complaints about property taxes when the state does good, right? In 13 and 15, when we had the surpluses, we heard a lot about property taxes. In 17 and 19, when we were scraping to find money, we didn't hear anybody come to us about property taxes. So, and here we are now and going into the 23 session, and we're going to be quite flush. And we're hearing again about property taxes now too. So the problem, guys, is with property taxes valuations. People's homes are going up in value substantially, and the way the formula is set, that's in there. So I've always thought if we're going to really do this, we should take a look at the formula as a whole, and specifically valuations, and how is that being figured? Is there any way we can tweak that so the jumps aren't so big and so heavy on the taxpayers in North Dakota?
Mike, your bill calls for a freeze of valuations over the next 2 years, but what happens in year 3? I mean, are we going to have just a huge spike, like a hockey stick sort of thing, where in year 3 valuations just shoot up? Are you concerned about that?
Yeah, well, possibly, Chad, but in those 2 years that we freeze it, the schools may, decide to go up every year, right? They'll increase their taxes if they want. So that bump, as you say, in year 3 may not be as pronounced, because I think they're going to want to go above that baseline to get up there. But yes, they'll definitely be there. It's not a perfect fix. We thought it was a way to kind of slow it down, to slow the spending down, and to do that, because I do think those schools will still bump their taxes up, and but it won't be as a big a bounce, I think, as some people think.
Mike, we talked a lot about, earlier in the interview, you mentioned that, we've really got to encourage locals to talk to their local officials if they're unhappy about their property tax. And I agree with that. And not just talk with local officials, also consider the consequences of your own choices. I'm up here in Minot. Not that long ago, we had a referendum on a bond issue because we want to build a new high school. And I voted for it because we need a new high school. And, but now that bond issue, it's hitting our property tax bills, and people are upset because their property taxes are going higher. And I'm like, listen, you voted for this. You voted for this, So I think there's a disconnect there. But if we want people to stop coming to the state for property tax relief, does it make sense for the state to continue offering property tax relief? Like, if this is a local problem, why not? Why should that be the message? I mean, because it seems like the legislature keeps caving and saying, okay, we'll do something about property taxes, instead of saying, listen, go back to your local officials and talk to them about it.
Well, in a perfect world, it'd be nice to do that, but I think I wouldn't use the word caving. I would use the word that the legislature is reacting to to their constituents. I talked to a good friend of mine who's running for a House seat out east, and I'd asked him. He told me he was knocking on doors, and I said, well, what are you hearing out there? What are people saying? He said, I hear 3 things: property tax, property tax, property tax, because the statements had just gone out the week prior. And so I think when you see these kind of things and you talk to legislators about property tax, it's in direct response from what they're hearing from the people when they're knocking on doors, from when they're going to the meetings. They want relief on property tax. So as a legislator, you're going, okay, what can we do? I mean, what can we do to help lessen this a little bit, or help our constituents to do this? And then obviously we take a look at a bill like we're doing today. So, I mean, I would love to say, hey, no, we're done. And, just kind of hold the line, but it's not going to work. And it's not what our constituents want either. So,
Mike, I'm going to ask you to be prognosticator a little bit. I think that this whole debate is fascinating between income and property taxes, right? I mean, you mentioned people hear about property taxes all the time, but the flip side of that is the state saying we don't control property taxes, so why not do income taxes? We actually control that. A dollar is a dollar, a dollar. I mean, people can use their income tax cut to pay for their property taxes. How do you think this plays out? Does it end up with some sort of combination of income and property, or does one or the other win out? I mean, do you have any feel for how this ends come May 1st? I know it's a long session.
Yeah, a lot of things could happen. We're all going to go in with their bills, and we're going to run them. And I think each one will start in each chamber, and we'll go from there, and we'll see what happens. You talked about the income tax. I can tell you, I've ran 4 campaigns. You can talk to any legislator who's knocked on doors. We hear nothing when you knock on doors about income tax. Nothing about that. And I'm not against the income tax cut, by the way. I wish in a perfect world we could do both. And we said at the press conference, North Dakota is in a very great position to even be having these discussions to talk about both of these. A lot of states can't even do it because of the great financial position that we're in. We can have these discussions and say, which one do we like? Now, do we want to do one and do a combination? That I think will all be looked at. I think at the end of the day, we may see one kind of pass in full and maybe see another one, maybe do a light version of it. But it comes down to cost. The income tax is $500 million. That's $500 million of the revenue stream, and ours would be funded strictly out of legacy fund, and would not be out of the revenue stream. But that's 340. So I mean, if you were to do both, that's 800. It'd be almost $900 million, and we just can't do both in their entirety. So that's a long answer, Chad, but I do think there'll be some talk about trying to do some combinations too, and it's worth taking a look at. Right? We'd be dumb not to at least have those talks and see, can you do both or a version of both? So there'll be a lot of those things knocked around here in the next number of months.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Is it an either or situation with the income tax or the property tax? But let me ask this instead, because it is interesting, and I think one thing that gets lost in people's minds is that you're using the legacy fund for this, and you're not using the legacy fund principle for this. I think sometimes we have to remember to think of the legacy fund as a new source of revenue, right? Because it's this giant principle that is then kicking off revenues in the form of interest, obviously, that the state can use for various things and is beginning to use for various things, and now you want to use it for property tax relief. My question is where is the common schools trust fund in all of this? Because you mentioned earlier that it's kicking off, what'd you say, like $500 million is expected to?
Yeah.
It seems like we're not that far away where we could, as the Common Schools Trust Fund continues to grow, that we could use that fund to fund exactly what you're talking about. And in fact, I think that would make your proposal a lot more palatable, is if you use legacy fund revenues as a stepping stone to get to a point where we're using Common School Trust Fund revenues to fund the state's funding of schools. I mean, to me, that would be just optimal, perfect world.
Yeah, and again, that'll all be part of the discussion, Rob. We were told the other day, I think it's just shy of $500 million Common Schools Trust Fund's going to throw off. I think it's around $6 billion or just shy of $6 billion right now. I would love us not to touch it, to let that grow, because I think if we do that in 2 or 3 bienniums, this thing could pay for a vast majority of K-12 funding, and that's what we've been doing in the past, is using the earnings from this to help fund K-12. So, but no, you're exactly right. And again, I think that'll all be part of the conversation to take a look at that. Foundation A Stabilization Fund has $400 million in it itself, and that's another area we could look for funding. So I think we could do it from a couple of different areas. Taking $500 million out of the legacy earnings, we have a legacy earnings stream build, and there's a lot of things that are already earmarked is a bad word, but a lot of things that people want to use that for. And so we really have to take a look how we're going to fund this. And like you said, both when you guys said earlier, is this sustainable? We have to make sure, obviously, this is sustainable. And I truly believe it is. like I said, we're in great shape financially. We have 3 big pots of money coming in. You have the general fund, which is in a surplus. We have the SIF, which is going to be probably close to $1 billion or more. And then the third one is what you talked about here, the legacy fund earnings, which will be in that $500 million range. So you do the math, and it's really quite substantial as far as what the legislature is going to be working with next session. So, there's a lot of different ways I think we can fund this.
Mike, I'm going to shift gears pretty dramatically here away from the tax conversation and talk a little bit about what's going on with the AG's office, with Jason Doctor, with all that stuff, with the building going on I think in South Bismarck. One of my concerns is that people have lost a lot of their trust in institutions. And it seems like a lot of the anger across the countryside is we can't trust these politicians. They're all corrupt, et cetera, et cetera. Are you concerned at all about, this, from what I can see in reading the articles and reading what Rob's written about the Jason Doctor situation, I don't know how much detail needs to be gone into here, but are you concerned about, this smells bad. What are your thoughts on this situation? Is there anything the legislature can do to create more transparency to make sure that these sort of potentially conflicts don't happen in the future?
And to be clear, before Representative Nathy is on the Lafferty committee, which received the audit report on this situation. So, Mike, you're kind of uniquely situated to speak to it.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Chad. Does this look bad? You bet it does. It looks horrible. It was quite the hearing we had last Tuesday on this. One thing, though, people need to remember, and I brought it up during the hearing, and Chairman Jerry Klein did too, is the report did not talk to Representative Doctor and his partners to get their side of the story, to find out where some of these invoices are. So, before we go further down the road, we need to hear both sides of the story. Now, having said that, I absolutely agree with you. We shouldn't have gotten to this point. The state was doing things that they normally don't do, which was really concerning. When you're signing leases before the partners buy the building. Now, that is a great, that's great for a private investor in the private sector. I would love to have something like that, but that's not what we do in government. That's not what we do with state dollars. And the state deviated from that normal practice. And, that's where some of these state officials that were involved in this did that. And that really raises red flags. If they would have followed their normal operating procedure, Chad, I don't think some of this stuff would have happened. I don't think this deal would have been done because they needed those tenants to sign the lease to get the financing. So this whole thing has just been one mess after another since our meeting back in June. And I did make the motion in June to have the AG office and the auditor get together for this report and to give it to us here in last September. And to find out exactly what's going on. If we didn't have this overrun, we would not have found out about missing emails, because that came as a result of our meeting in June. The missing emails were discovered by a media request, I think by Rob or somebody.
Me among others. It wasn't just me, but me among others.
Yeah. All of a sudden, the AG Attorney General office says, "Hey, we don't have any emails," and they were unaware of that until they were asked to look for them. So, and it's been kind of one thing after another that we've gotten on this thing, and you can't make it up. And now part of the conversation the other day on the emails was we were told, there's no way to get them back, I called ITD in August. I had heard maybe there was a way with Microsoft. Oh no, you can't do it. Then we hear last week, oh yeah, maybe we can. All you have to do is request it. And you talk about trust, Rob. Absolutely, the trust has been broken on many different levels. With me, with ITD, and a number of other things. You're absolutely right. And the public has every right to be skeptical about what's going on with this. Absolutely. So that's why we kicked it to the AG office last week, and they're getting a outside investigator to go through the report and to get Representative Doctor and his partner's side of the story, and to make sure we get all the information that we need. But it's been hard to get some of this information, unfortunately, from state officials. And unfortunately, Attorney General Wayne Stedham has passed away. You have the Assistant Attorney General who refused to speak on this. Some other members of the office who are refusing to speak on this. It's just one thing, and then the Assistant Attorney General's emails are gone. He was central in this whole overcost overrun thing. So it just lends even more kind of conspiracy-minded, raises more red flags with you. it's kind of been one thing after another. And as a committee member, it's been really, really frustrating. I've never seen anything like this, never been a part of anything like this before. And the public should know we as legislators are trying to get to the bottom of this from both sides of the aisle. And we'll wait to hear that next report coming out, and then I think we'll go from there and see what happens.
Mike, we invited you on to talk about property taxes. I appreciate you answering some questions about this other issue that was obviously before your committee. Last question for you. The one thing with the lease and everything that I've been scratching my head trying to figure out is what was the public benefit? Like what public benefit accrued from moving the offices to this building? Because I'm trying to think, did it save the taxpayers money? Well, clearly not. We're paying more per square foot. Was it of some benefit to state employees? Because, hey, if we can help state employees do their job better or easier or be more effective or whatever, I'm not necessarily I'm not against that either, but it seems like the department directors were opposed to this. So I'm trying to figure out, do you know, what was the public benefit from moving to this building?
Well, we asked that question back in June, and we couldn't get an answer, right? Because the very people that were there were gone. So I went back and I watched every hearing on the Attorney General's budget in the House and in the Senate. And in the very first hearing in January in the Attorney General's budget, they touched on the building very briefly, and the Assistant Attorney General got up there and filled them in. And they asked them, "Why are you doing this?" And they said, "Well, we think we can save $50,000 to $70,000 a year in operations by doing this," which I think is pretty small to move all those people for just that. But $50,000 to $70,000. The chairman of the committee asked for some construction costs, and they said, "Hey, we'll get that to you." At the end of the day, when it went through the House, they never got back to him. I watched the Senate hearings on this. They never even talked about the building on the Senate side. We did a walk through the building last Tuesday morning before we had the committee hearing, and we talked to a couple of department heads, and they were not happy. And there was one that didn't pull any punches whatsoever. They were very upset about going down there. Their staff didn't want to go down there. And they told us it's actually more expensive down there now than it was up at the Capitol, because now they have to pay for plowing. They got to pay for all the other maintenance stuff. Their rent is higher. And the reason why their rent is higher is because they have to pay for the cost overrun. It has not been a good move financially. It's costing the state more money. And they have less space by about 2,500 square feet. So again, we're asking these questions, but the people that made those decisions are no longer in the office. And that is the big part of the frustrations that I'm having with this.
Well, Mike, I thank you. Well, while you were talking, I did some quick math. If they were saving $50,000 a year, I think the budget overrun was like $1.8 million. It would take 36 years saving $50,000 a year to recoup that budget overrun. Yeah. So I don't.
We figured out.
I know you weren't defending it. I wanted to put that math out there because it's just kind of mind-boggling.
And this department head we talked about, he said, "Hey, we used to have the public up in our office all the time. We were able to help the public." He said,
because they were in the
public
Capitol.
Never comes to us anymore because they're down south. They're a little harder to find. It's easy to go to Capitol and find these guys. So no, they are not happy one bit about being down there. And there are one other department too, not happy about it. The lottery department, their rent went up. And according to law, any of the profits they get, they have to put in the general fund. Well, they're putting less in the general fund because their rent went up.
It appears the biggest beneficiary of all of this is Representative Doctor and his companies.
And his business partners too, by the way.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there. I think, Mike, you make a good point. I'm anxious to hear if there's an explanation that can come from Representative Doctor and his business partners that can make this look better than it does right now. I cannot imagine what that is, but I'm certainly willing to hear it if they're going to offer it. Thank you for your time today, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy talking to you.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
We'll just finish up our interview with State Representative Mike Nathy and that situation with Jason Doctor. First of all, very interesting debate. I'm good at the dynamics of the debate between the property tax proposal and the income tax proposal. I have a feeling that's going to be some trench warfare when we get to the session.
It's a fascinating debate because even as somebody who probably isn't a huge support, I prefer the property tax over the income tax because I think it's easier to get out of the appropriation than it is to change the rates back. But I think you can make a case if you're a legislator and you're sick of getting blamed for property taxes, just cut the income tax and put people cash back in people's pockets.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, and it's just a fascinating debate. And again, I had a lot of conversations with legislators last week. They're going through this in their head, both parties, just trying to figure out, where should we land on this thing. Very interesting.
I thought he was also very, very direct about. And listen, Republicans got to be, because this looks terrible for them. It's one of their own that's at the heart of this thing. Well, more than one. I mean, Wayne Stenjum, too, who's, and it's so frustrating that he's not here to talk to us about it. It's so frustrating that those emails are missing. I thought he was very blunt and very direct about that. And so I hope that continues, and I hope that some people are held accountable for that. All right, let's talk about congressional races. We had a lot of polling out over the last week. The Democratic MPL releasing a poll that looked pretty good for Cara Munn, didn't have her leading, but had her at 40%, Kelly Armstrong at 44%. And then Kelly came back and released 3 of his own polls that he commissioned from three different polling agencies that showed him consistently above or near 50%, Munn consistently down in the 30s, him consistently with a 15 to 20 point lead. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. But, I mean, obviously 2 very distinct pictures of that race coming from 4 different polling sources. What did you make of it all?
Yeah, you know that I'm most familiar with the pollster that did the Dem poll, Dean Mitchell, who I trust his numbers. The one consistency I saw through all 3 of the polls was Kelly's number, right? I mean, he was always sort of in that 45 to 50 range. I mean, I think the one takeaway is that's about where Kelly is right now. With leads from 4 points to 20 points. And like something like a 500 to 1 cash on hand advantage. So I think that the race is probably where we expected it to be, with Kelly having a clear advantage. If I was an incumbent with those kind of numbers and that kind of cash on hand advantage, I would feel pretty good about it. I think where Cara ends up is probably 10 points better than the average
Democratic.
So, but I think, again, it sort of shows she's high profile. If she gets 45% without spending any money, it's a really, really impressive showing.
It's, although I would argue, somewhat circumstantial. She got in late. She hasn't been exposed to a lot of the scrutiny that a candidate who engages in the full process has.
Well, sounds like a pretty damn good strategy then. I mean, if the goal is to get as many votes as possible, I agree it's maybe unique circumstances, but maybe it's the right circumstance to get as many votes as possible.
Right. I mean, I guess I'm looking at this from a member of the public where I would rather the candidates be more fully. I'm not interested in what works best for the candidates. I'm interested in what gives the public the most full view of who the candidates are. So, I'm not going to endorse any sort of obfuscation from the candidates to even if it might be politically effective. You're right. I mean, maybe it is, but that doesn't mean I want everybody to start doing it. Because I would rather have the process where they're exposed to more scrutiny. I mean, politicians always benefit from having less scrutiny. It doesn't make it a good thing.
Sure.
Anyway, that's my argument. There was some teasing in there about the Senate race. Although we didn't really get any numbers from that poll, I guess I don't know where that poll numbers are. I will say I've seen another poll. This would be even a 5th poll, and this was not done. This was done by a third-party group that I'm not really at liberty to talk about. So listen, everybody who's listening to this, if you want to take this for a grain of salt and dismiss it completely, because I can't tell you who and everything else, and I haven't even seen the polling, but I trust it. Says that Hoeven in that Senate race is close to 60, and the two others are combining for about 30%. Christensen at about 17, Becker at 12. That poll was taken 2 weeks ago, and then the rest undecided. That looked really good for Hoeven and surprised me. I mean, he's doing better than I thought.
Yeah, and Rob, I've seen some polling that shows Hoeven in the mid-40s and the other two in the mid-20s, moving forward. I think the bigger question here is the whole polling industry. I think getting samples is more difficult as less people have landlines. I think getting a good sample with the division within the Republican Party, I think getting a sample that properly weights sort of the Trumpian Republicans versus the traditional Republicans is very difficult. Right now in North Dakota, not all Republicans are equal and have so I think samples are very difficult and without landlines and having to do online and whatever. The nice thing this cycle, though, is I'll tell you, like in 2018, everybody and their dog was doing polling, so people weren't answering the phones to do polling. There's not that much going on this cycle, so I think more people are probably answering their phones. I got a text poll about the District 35 Senate race. I love the text poll because then it allows me to screenshot and send it around if I want to. But so I
appreciate as well, because I never get polled for anything. Everybody takes me off their lists. I don't know, but I don't ever get polled.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I don't get pulled off of those lists because I think it's always interesting to see where.
Yeah, me too. I want to know what questions they're asking and everything.
Yeah, but I think that the question about polling is going to be one that we're seeing all around the country right now, and nobody trusts polling. I mean, everybody I talk to at the national level is like, don't believe any poll that shows there a huge distance between two candidates. Every Senate race, every congressional race, and every governor's race that was identified as close at the beginning of the cycle is tied. I mean, that's essentially where all these races are.
The only time, to me, you shouldn't hang your hat on any poll, and every candidate should go, guns blazing all the way in. The only thing is I get more confident the more data points we have. Yeah. Right. And so the more polls we have from credible sources, the better, the more confident I feel in the results. And I guess in the House race, I'm thinking the race is probably closer to what the Armstrong campaign's polling is showing as opposed to what the Dem NPL poll is showing, because we have 3 polls from 3 different organizations that are showing roughly the same thing, and then 1 poll's an outlier. I'm kind of leaning. The race, I think, is probably, and again, every poll is just a snapshot in time. Public sentiment is fluctuating. We don't know what it's going to be, by the time people, start casting their ballot, which they are now. But right now, as far as the race, that's the direction I'm leaning.
Generally, I would agree with you if there's 3 polls saying one thing and another one that says something quite different. The only caveat I'd put there is I'm familiar with Dean's work. I'm familiar with Odney's work. Those are 2 that I would somewhat trust. The other 2 groups that Kelly's worked with, I don't have any idea who they are, if they've ever worked in the state.
Yeah, when I wrote about them, they had some grades from 538 and that, for what that's worth. There weren't really a ton of polls graded. I mean, I did my best. I mean, I don't know.
No, but the BC is sort of when they don't have enough thing to give them sort of a real grade.
It's kind of a provisional, yeah.
The nice thing is we only have a month to wait.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk about something else with Cara Mund.
Sure.
Your column again saying that she's only getting support from Democrats.
Well, it's true.
She's having an event. Well, Rob, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Did you look at the other hosts for the Fargo event?
I know. Who was it?
Well, it's 4 different people, including a active Republican whose name is escaping me now. Give me 1 second. But been a delegate to the Republican convention very recently. Dr. Stephanie Dahl, who's been a Republican to a GOP convention. I don't think she identifies as a Republican anymore. And then Jane Allen, who is a columnist and obviously left of center. But I think you're sort of identifying that Cara is not a true independent unless she has support from elected official Republicans. I mean, she's never going to get support from Republicans who are not rank and, I mean, she might get it from some rank and file, but I think that it's sort of an unfair sort of constant criticism.
I don't agree with that at all, obviously, which is why I'm making the criticism.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm less worried about the people endorsing her than I am the people who seem to be how she's organizing her campaign. I mean, there is a big gap between I'm going to go to Congress and I'm probably going to caucus with Republicans and Jane Allen and Heidi Heitkamp and Earl Pomeroy and Joel Heitkamp and Carla Rose Hansen and Thomas Dixon, all of these very, I would say very partisan Democrats in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously some of them were Democratic elected officials.
I've never seen Jane Allen at a Democratic event in my life.
Okay,
so
but she's very, very left wing. I don't understand how those people are supporting someone who could go in this very divided midterm election, who could go and be the deciding vote to give Republicans a majority in Congress. I just don't believe it. And I'm combining that with the fact that Mund has no track record at all. The only thing we have are the things that she says, and I don't put a lot of stock. I think actions speak a lot louder than words. So I have Cara Mund's words versus her actions in getting a whole lot of money from Democrats.
First of all, she hasn't gotten a whole lot of money from anyone, and I think that's one of the problems.
Trying to get a whole lot of money from Democrats.
Sure, but I think you talking about the event happening at Carla Rose Hansen's house, ignoring that there's other hosts that maybe you don't recognize.
I wasn't aware of the other hosts, I guess. Well, I didn't see those on the invitation.
Whoever sent you that screen grab should have clicked on it so they could have seen the other hosts. But I mean, I think that's you can't say she's not an independent because she doesn't have any support outside of the Democrat Party, and then ignore the other public names.
But every Republican, like you said, Stacey Dahl, you had one Republican you didn't name, Stacey Dahl, who doesn't identify as a Republican anymore.
It's Deanna Bjornson.
I don't know who that person is.
Yeah, and that's just it. I mean, it's the same as the Dixon event. There's a bunch of people who are co-hosts. You focus in on Dixon. You don't know if those other people were Republican. But you don't know if the other people are Republicans.
Were there any?
Yes, there were, or certainly. Well, hold on. And she's running as an independent. There's also a bunch of people who are independents there. I mean, you can't just ignore because you don't know who these people are.
But you're wanting to lock this into a very partisan point of view. I'm taking a very broader ideological point of view. Listen, I followed her on social media before. I saw her retweeting Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all this stuff, and now all of a sudden she's a Republican. And listen, if you want to get elected in North Dakota, being right of center is a good place to be. I think she's trying to pull the wool over our eyes. Now maybe I'm wrong, but look at all the evidence in support of the idea that I'm right. I don't think Thomas Dixon is really trying to support somebody after decades spent promoting Democratic candidates, electing Democratic candidates, that he's now trying to elect somebody who's going to go caucus with Republicans in Congress. I don't believe it.
But these are binary choices. I mean, at this point, it's Cara Mund and Kelly Armstrong, right? I mean, and if both are going to caucus with Republicans, and let's say you're pro-choice, Republican, Democrat, Independent, you're going to choose to support Cara Mund, right? I mean, that's just the fact.
I don't know that's true because you've seen the issue polling as much as I have. You can be pro-choice, and disagree with Kelly Armstrong's stance on abortion, but still vote for him because you value other issues higher.
That's fair, and the same as pro-life, valuing other issues and voting for Cara. That is a very fair point. I just think that we're trying too hard. You're trying too hard to pigeonhole her and ignoring some other data points.
I think she's pigeonholing herself, and you're asking me to look at these grains of salt over here and ignore the salt mine.
But you just did a column on a grain of salt of Carla Rose Hansen hosting an event.
That's not a grain of salt. A candidate raises money with is not a grain of salt. It's hugely important.
You're ignoring all the other people she's raising money with.
You mentioned two.
There was an event in Bismarck last night. Did you do a report on that?
What was that event? I don't know. Nobody told me about it.
It was a bunch of independent people getting together and supporting her.
I wasn't aware of it. I'm not aware of it. Well, then maybe Cara should talk about this stuff, right? Because, and again, we haven't
fundraisers, Rob. Only you talk about people's fundraisers,
right? Well, other people maybe should work harder. I like to think I do a pretty good job of covering North Dakota politics. Few people cover it as in-depth as I do. So I'm not going to apologize for that. And second, we're also ignoring the fact that the Democratic NPL moved their candidate out of the race to get him out of Cara Munn's way. I'm just supposed to ignore that and pretend like it didn't happen?
Rob, again, you're painting so broadly here. The state Democratic Party did not do that. There are prominent members that are Democrats who weren't at the convention, who many of whom don't even live in the state anymore. But for you to say the Democrats is a pretty broad brush for you to say. There's a lot of Democrats who are very upset about that.
I interviewed some of them, but which set of Democrats are calling the shots? Well, because it sure seems like one group has a lot more say than the other.
Well, I think that's a fair thing in this decision, but I also think it's just unfair to suggest that because a handful of really prominent Democrats, that the Democratic Party. I mean, these aren't people who are going to the executive committee and you saw the vote that they took at the policy committee to keep Mark on the ballot when some yahoos wanted to kick him off. So I just think we need to be careful. Just because a group of some segment of people are doing things doesn't mean everybody's doing this.
Okay, but what? Yeah, I just you're asking me to ignore a lot of things, and listen, I'm wrong. This is my argument. I'm not persuaded by the few token, maybe former Republicans, maybe current Republicans, whatever. I've said all along, I think that she's probably going to draw up. One of the reasons I think we said earlier, we think that I think we agree. We think she's probably going to overperform the typical Democratic candidate by about 10 points. That's probably some pro-choice Republicans for whom the abortion, at least some of those are pro-choice Republicans for whom the abortion issue is a high enough priority that it's going to swing their vote. They're going to swing over. So I don't question that she has some Republican support. But to ignore the mountain of support she's getting from Democrats and pretend as though that doesn't matter when she's simultaneously trying to portray herself as this sort of moderate Republican who was kept out of the party by old evil white men when she didn't even try to seek the party's endorsement. She didn't even try. To me, that is facetious. That is dishonest, honestly.
Rob, a mountain of support. She, as of her last AP story in the AP, she's raised $20,000.
Well, it's not just financial.
It's not just sources are coming in here and shoveling money to Cara Munn.
Every single left of center newspaper columnist in this state has come out in favor of Cara Munn. Right, she has gotten so much earned media from that sort of thing. So we're not just measuring in monetary value here.
But Rob, she would also really like if you would write columns about how good she is too. She would accept that support from everybody.
Well, no candidate is ever gonna, unless we're talking about like a white supremacist. Nobody is gonna decline support from anybody. So that's true of every single. Kelly Armstrong would be happy to tout if Democrats were out endorsing him, but they're not.
Well, and I want to be clear about Kelly Armstrong. I like Kelly Armstrong. I love how accessible he is. I mean, you and I both know that Kelly is very accessible.
Sure, absolutely.
And I think Kelly's a good guy.
I will tell you one other thing that bothers me about this is it seems like I'm tough on a lot of politicians, right? I'm tough on Rick Becker. The 2016 race, I was tough on Doug Burgum. I was tough on Heidi Heitkamp. Like, I have a long history of being tough on a lot of people because I think that's the job. I will tell you, I don't like it when people suggest that I'm being tough on Cara Munn because she's a woman. I think that's a canard. I think that's ridiculous. I think it's a deflection. It has everything to do with exactly what I'm saying it. I mean, you can take my arguments at face value. I think there's a disconnect between how she's portraying herself and who she really is. Now, you can disagrey with that, and if you think I'm wrong and all that, that's fine. It has nothing to do with her being a woman.
So, I mean, I didn't bring up her gender at all in this
conversation. You did not.
I do think your argument is all wet, but that's a whole nother thing. But I think it's going to be an interesting race at the end of the day because of these types of conversations, right? I mean, she has created this sort of interest level in a different way. Now, we'll see in November if that matters and if that interest level actually creates votes or not. But anyway, it's an interesting cycle. You want to talk? Well, and I will also comment on your piece about, basically everybody in the public arena takes shots, and maybe that's not worth a news story. The column that you did about Cara and Kelly. I think there's some truth to that. I don't think it's right, and I think you sort of you agreed with that. I mean,
it's horrible. I'm not defending it at all. I'm not saying it's okay. Yeah. I don't know what to do about it. Do we bomb Facebook servers? Like, I don't know what to do about it, because it's horrendous. It's not new. I think the volume's louder because every yokel on the internet has a podium now.
But it would be great if people just stopped being mean.
It would be.
How Pollyanna is that?
It would be. And I mean, I tried to, because I'm not a stranger to it. I had threats against my family weeks ago, right? I know all about this, and it's terrible. I guess, my problem is a certain candidate comes along, and it's a bigger deal than maybe it was. Kelly Armstrong's faced threats. Kelly Armstrong voted to codify gay marriage. I saw the stuff on social media. He got a lot of ugly stuff about that. He voted to certify the election. He got a lot of ugly stuff about that. It's not unique to Caramond. It's not specific to Caramond. And I wanted to be clear. We shouldn't pretend like it is, because it's not.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but also I think there might be something to be said about calling it out a little bit more, and I wish we'd call out people by name in these situations. I mean, I know when Erin was in the Senate, my wife, I mean, some of the stuff she would get was just like, how could you possibly write things like that? And she always responded to them, and wouldn't just let them off the hook. So I think it's important we just don't ignore this crap as well. Although we could also just spend, running around in a circle chasing these.
It's hard to know what to do, because on one hand, if you engage with it, are you feeding it now? Because what's the consequence, right? I mean, the idea of suing some of them in court is daunting, even beyond obviously the First Amendment implications. The idea, like, are you going to try to get everybody fired who says something awful on social media? You could employ somebody full time just trying to do that for one politician. I could probably employ somebody full time just pursuing that for the people who say awful things, slanderous and everything about me. So, but it's the world that we're living in. And I worry sometimes, I don't know, you go back and forth. To me, I'm in the mood I'm in right now. It's just kind of like, listen, it is what it is. We got to focus on issues and not this other stuff.
But again, I worry that when you just let this stuff slide, not you, us as a society let this stuff slide, that people just think it's even more acceptable. But then again, if you respond to them and call them out, they might think it's more acceptable, and they're doing even more important work by calling out us normal people.
What else is going on? Herschel Walker thing, which never ceases to amaze me. I have a column up today. My headline is that Republicans are against abortion except in cases of rape, incest, and political expediency. And this frustrating. It's even beyond how you feel about abortion, right? Pro-choice, pro-life. It's the fact that he's lying about it. It's the fact that even going back to like 2021, we knew that this man had threatened previous girlfriends. We knew that he had threatened his ex-wife. One of his own children is now on social media saying, this guy's a family values guy. He left me and my mom. He has 4 children by 4 different women, didn't live with any of them, didn't really try to be a father to any of them, went out and he's having affairs and everything else like this is. And of course, the person writing to his defense is serial adulterer Donald Trump. And I'm just thinking, like, Republicans, why would you expect anyone to believe anything you have to say about values or principles or integrity when you keep lining up behind Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and Blake Masters and Herschel Walker and Roy Moore? Like, at some point, Republicans, and they're going to say, well, Democrats have terrible candidates too. Yes, they do. But that has nothing to do with your decision to support horrible candidates.
Yeah, but by and large, I mean, often Republicans are seen as sort of the party of family values, traditional marriage.
Although I never understood why Democrats are against that. I mean, why would you cede that to Republicans? I mean,
I agree. I am not ceding that. As somebody who just walked to school with his son and his wife this morning,
sure.
I'm all about family.
And I don't question your family values at all.
Yeah. Yes, but I don't understand how my Republican neighbors who go to church every Sunday and, family values, they're all about, community and family and whatever, and traditional marriage, can get behind Donald Trump, can get behind Herschel Walker, who are the antithesis of family values, while at the same time hating Barack Obama for being an anti-family guy who's been married to the same woman, 2 children who are successful. It just, maybe we should stop just assuming that one party has a leg up on family values, because you're right, there's terrible things on both sides, but Democrats aren't running out there, saying that we're better than everybody. And when they do, it ends up being John Edwards, who, remember John Edwards used to talk about his great relationship with his wife and all that different stuff? Then it came back and smacked him real good, and it should have.
Right. Well, it should have, because he was busy impregnating another woman while his wife died from cancer. So,
right.
Despicable behavior. But and you're right about the Barack Obama thing. I didn't like Barack Obama because of his policies. I always thought he seemed like a great husband, great dude. Yeah. I'd like to go to a baseball game or something with him sometime, but I don't want him holding elected office because I don't agree with his policies, right? The same way I would never vote for you for any elected office ever, Chad, but I would like to hang out with you and your family sometime.
I'm going to find, again, these are binary choices. I'm going to find a person that you would vote for me over that person. But I assume you're a sit out the election guy, aren't you?
I don't vote against people. I have to vote for people. That's the way I calculate. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I didn't vote in 2 presidential elections. The last 2. Yeah, I didn't vote at all in either of them. Because I didn't see either person worth my support. And I realize other people, I don't begrudge other people making that decision. That's how I approach my ballot as a citizen. But yeah, it frustrates me when I hear someone like Kevin Cramer supporting Herschel Walker, and I'm just thinking, why? How can you do that?
Or John Hoeven, really prompting up the Trump endorsement before the GOP convention. I assume we'll be hearing more about that.
Which was not sincere. I'm sure Trump, he'll lean on Trump because it appeals and it'll erode, and it's smart politics to the point, one of the points we started out, that may be smart politics, that doesn't make it okay.
That I agree 100%.
Well,
because at some point that the traditional Republicans need to distance themselves from these people. And even though it's a month before the election, when Herschel Walker is who Herschel Walker is, it doesn't mean that Mitch McConnell and others need to jump to his defense.
Yeah. Well, also, like look at the number of Republicans. That's the thing that always – Ted Cruz, that craven – whatever else, things that I'm not going to say on air about him. Donald Trump at one point accused his father of being complicit in the assassination plot for JFK.
And took some ugly shots at his spouse, his wife as well.
Called his wife ugly. And then Ted Cruz was like groveling for like the other day, like he said something on Fox News that Trump didn't like, so he went groveling, to Donald Trump about it. And I'm just, how can you do that? Like, talk about Mitch McConnell. Donald Trump is using racial slurs about your wife.
Yep.
And you're just going to take, and granted, Mitch McConnell stood up to Trump in some ways, but he's not going to come out and condemn it. He's just going to sit there and take it because they're all afraid of the base. And
don't you think Mitch McConnell regrets not whipping some votes to impeach Trump
when he had the chance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he's regretting that right about now.
Well, I think so too. But I don't know. Maybe this makes me stupid, but I would rather lose some elections and not support terrible, terrible people. But I guess a lot of people don't want to make that calculation. All right, we're at an hour. We should end it there. Chad, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob. Have a good week.
I should note, Jamie Selzer going to be sitting in for you next week on You're Out next week. You're busy. So next week, Wednesday, Jamie will be joining me. I don't have a guest booked for it yet, but
I think Jamie can fill my shoes. If anybody can, it's Jamie Selzer.
Jamie Selzer. That's right. Thanks as always, Chad.
All right, see ya.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? at inforum.com/podcasts. We have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.